Good morning, and I'd like to call to order the Subcommittee on Government Operations, a subcommittee of the Government Oversight and Reform Committee. Welcome you to today's hearing, and the title of today's hearing is Evaluating Public Housing in the United States, Reining in Waste, Fraud, Abuse, and Mismanagement at Public Housing Authorities. Pleased to welcome everyone again, and let me explain the order of business first. Members of the panel will be recognized for opening statements. Then we'll go to our witnesses, and we have 3 witnesses this morning, and we'll hear their testimony. Then we'll get into questions. And
you need a motion, Mr. Chairman.
I see that we are joined by our colleague from the full committee, Ms. Maloney, and Mr. Conley is recognized for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask unanimous consent that our colleague, Ms. Maloney, be allowed to participate as a full member of the subcommittee.
Without objection, so ordered, and she, of course, is most welcome this morning. I will begin with my opening statement. Last night, I spent some time reviewing some of the material that had been prepared for the hearing, and I just sometimes it makes it difficult to sleep at night when you read accounts of public funds and public endeavors to try to assist people that aren't working well. We've all been shocked by what we've seen at the Veterans Administration. Last night I was shocked by what I saw with in regard to waste, fraud, and abuse. Mr. Issa always starts the hearing with a little statement that the purpose of our committee is oversight and to make certain the taxpayers' money is properly spent. And this is what we're going to do with this hearing today. That is an important function. So with that, I'll begin with an opening statement and again yield to other members as we move forward this morning. So today we're going to look at how we can best improve the administration of public housing and low-cost rental assistance programs, particularly by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, commonly known as HUD. We'll do so by examining some of the expenditures of taxpayer funds made by public housing authorities. Also use the acronym PHAs. Unfortunately, all too often, these housing authority executives seem to be taking advantage of the system by paying themselves extensive and excessive salaries and benefits, by not distributing the funds properly, and in fact, at times we have documented cases of defrauding taxpayer money. Today's hearing will examine how to best put a stop to some of these problems and mismanagement. HUD spends about $6 to $7 billion a year in capital and operating funds for about 1.2 million public housing units, which house about 2.7 million people. Through its largest rental assistance program, the Section 8 program, it's a voucher program that HUD utilizes private sector market rents for some 2.2 million low-income households, and that's at a cost of about $20 billion a year. According to HUD, the average annual cost per unit for HUD voucher program in 2013 was $7,800. Not an enormous amount of money, but significant. Together, HUD's provisions of all housing, public housing, and rental assistance programs accounted for nearly 60% of its total budget in 2013. And in testimony last month, Secretary Donovan stated that this figure increased over 84% in HUD's 2015 budget request. Strengthening the soundness and integrity of the nation's public housing system is absolutely critical to safeguarding public funds. Unfortunately, public housing system in the United States suffers from also a large capital backlog, high vacancy rates in some places, and many units are in desperate need of reconstruction. HUD released a study in mid-2011 finding that the backlog of capital needs in public housing stood at that point at $20.7 billion, and the annual needs are accruing at a rate of some $3.4 billion per year. According to HUD, 478 total developments are currently considered failing. And as of March 31st, 2014, there were 10,258 public housing units that have been approved for awaiting demolition, and 23,524 more that are currently under review for removal by HUD. Nationwide, a system of approximately 4,000 quasi-governmental housing authorities exist, and they've administered public housing and rental assistance on behalf of HUD for the past 80 years. Unfortunately, problems with some of the housing authority finances are all too common. As of the second quarter of fiscal year 2014, 49 housing authorities were designated as very high risk. 38 housing authorities were also designated as troubled and assigned additional monitoring through HUD's public housing assessment system. 8 housing authorities are also under some type of receivership or falling into default with their contracts with HUD. Misuse of taxpayer money by some of these housing authority executives is very common, unfortunately. Taxpayer money is being spent with, unfortunately, little oversight, and housing authority executives are oftentimes unethically dispensing funds on initiatives unrelated to public housing. Since the start of fiscal 2012, the Office of Inspector General of HUD has issued 75 audits related to housing authorities, reporting about $225 million in questionable costs and about $24 million in funds to be put to better use, according to his report. Today, the Inspector General is here to discuss these audits and the substantial work that's been conducted to date on these issues. We'll also hear testimony from officials from some of the country's largest housing authorities. Mr. Kelvin Jeremiah has been President and CEO of the Philadelphia Housing Authority for a little over a year, since March 14, 2013. The HUD IG has found some serious problems with the Philadelphia Housing Authority, which in fact is the 4th largest housing authority in the United States. Notably, and let me quote what Senator Chuck Grassley called, and I use his quote, one of the strongest audits he had ever seen, and it was released by HUD in March 2011. That report found that the Philadelphia Housing Authority paid $30 million to 15 law firms from 2007 to 2010 and could not fully explain what the money went for. The Philadelphia Housing Authority also made unreasonable and unnecessary payments of $1.1 million to outside attorneys, now listen to this, to obstruct the progress of HUD OIG audits. Mr. Cecil House, the General Manager of the New York City Housing Authority, is also here to testify today. That housing authority is, in fact, the largest in the country. The HUD OIG recently released 2 audits criticizing that authority's administration of its Section 8 vouchers. The first audit questioned $1.16 billion in dispersed housing assistance payments. The second audit determined that 99 of 119 units inspected at that housing authority did not meet HUD's housing quality standards, and 24 of these 99 units were in material noncompliance with HUD standards, which could cost the Housing Authority in New York, $148 million next year alone. Mismanagement in public housing funds is not relegated to the largest housing authorities. Let me tell you a quick story here about my experience. I represent Central Florida's small community to the north, Sanford, Florida. Ever since almost the day I took office, I have had nothing but problems with that particular housing authority. It actually has never been in my district. It's adjacent and has been very close to my district. The first greeting I had was a housing authority director coming to my office with a list of charges by the state's attorney of offenses that she had committed and asked me to help her. I tried to help her out the door of my office when she came in, and I read what was going on. So I've been working on that issue on that project. This is a very small housing authority, not like the big ones we have here. And my goal has been to ensure that taxpayer money's being expended in a transparent and efficient manner, and also provide public housing or affordable housing to people who need it. Unfortunately, the Sanford Housing Authority's mismanagement and fraud and other problems goes on and on like a nightmare. In October 2011, an OIG audit found that $1.2 million in funds given to the Sanford Housing Authority starting in 2007 were let me just quote from the report, abusive or ineligible, not reasonable, or not properly supported. Specifically, the Inspector General, OIG, uncovered over $50,000 in credit card and leave abuses, including $16,000 in unofficial travel by the former Housing Authority Executive Director. I'll put his name on the record. $481,000 in public assistance fund was not budgeted or eligible. Again, I'm quoting from the report. Mr. Tu also spent $1.1 million for services provided by 3 firms without support that he acquired services in compliance with HUD and SHA's procurement requirements. As a result of this and prior mismanagement, HUD was obligated to spend more than $9 million to relocate tenants and they're going to demolish 374 of 480 public housing units owned and managed at 6 developments in Sanford that might have otherwise been preserved. Unfortunately, today the mayor was not able to be here of Sanford, so I'm taking a couple minutes to go into what he would have told you. Earlier this year, the Orlando Sentinel reported that, now listen to this, the Sanford Housing Authority expects to spend $1 million on operating expenses this year, even though only 6 families are living in the public housing run by the authority. They had over a $100,000 water bill for 6 families, probably because nobody turned the water off and the public's paying for it. It's just outrageous. I was quoted after I did a review of this saying we could put people up in the Ritz-Carlton cheaper than the money that we spent in this mess. And in the past, just for your information too, I have actually written and had that authority taken over by HUD, which you can do. I didn't know you could do that, but they informed me after tenants brought to my office rats they had captured in a cage, and no one would do anything about it. So we took it over. They spent millions of dollars getting it back in. Then they put this guy in who ran away with taxpayer-supported money and money that was supposed to be for, again, people who needed low-cost housing. So HUD may argue that because public housing authorities are state and local government entities, there's no reason to conduct meaningful oversight of them at the congressional level. However, expenditure of all taxpayer money deserves our full attention, and will provide that proper oversight with this and other hearings as necessary. I hope this hearing will start the conversation as to how we can improve public housing, rein in the corruption, fraud, and abuse that undermines the ability of scarce public housing funds to reach individuals and families most in need of that help. So it's a long opening statement. I want to thank the staff, has done a great job in researching some of this. I'm going to put just in the record, I had them make up the history of this, my little housing authority. We haven't calculated the millions of dollars that have been wasted and abused and stolen. But this is the story, and I want that part of the record. And without objection, Mr. Connolly asked that it be made part of the record. It's just a nightmare. Again, I apologize for taking more time. I've taken the time that the Mayor would have had. And I recognize Mr. Connolly for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And it's very sobering to hear the story you describe. Housing is a complex subject, and you know, the experience is obviously very region to region. And I'm very interested in hearing more about troubled experiences in this hearing today. I do want to talk about my own experience, however. Until I came here to Congress, I was the chairman of Fairfax County, one of the largest counties in the United States, suburban Washington. When I became chairman, I was chairman for 5 years, I started as one of my major priorities an affordable housing initiative, working with our Redevelopment and Housing Authority. The goal was to try to preserve, among other goals, 1,000 units in 4 years, because we were rapidly losing affordable housing in our community. We, in fact, preserved outright, that we purchased 2,400 units. It's a very successful program. In fact, for 15 consecutive years, HUD has named us, designated us as a high performer, the highest designation a housing authority can get. And we also have been designated as a moving to work agency by HUD, one of only 39 in the United States. So there are successful models. We also, as part of that affordable housing initiative, we focused on workforce housing because our police, firefighters, and teachers couldn't afford to live in the community in which they served. We also focused on ending homelessness in 10 years, because transitional housing is the key to achieving that kind of goal. And since I started that initiative, we are the only major jurisdiction in metropolitan Washington that has seen any decrease in its homeless population, and we have consistently seen a decrease every year, such that we've reduced our homeless population by over a third. I think a pretty good accomplishment. We dedicated a penny on our tax rate to affordable housing, and we had public support for it. Now, a penny was about $22 to $24 million a year. It was the first time in our history we'd ever dedicated a penny on the tax rate for any purpose. We did it for affordable housing, and we did it because we were trying to deal with a crisis where housing prices were going through the roof before the bubble burst, and the people that served our economy could not afford to live in our community and created enormous congestion. It's actually kind of a success story. We've had some bumps along the way. We have a single residency occupancy facility that is very successful in helping single folks in transitional housing get back on their feet. We have a very vibrant partnership with the nonprofit and faith communities. Everything from a hypothermia program in the winter that has actually successfully allowed us to reduce the number of hypothermia deaths in the winter to 0 for the first time in our history, and get people back on their feet. Trying to keep, we opened some family shelters to make sure we could keep families together and not disperse kids into government foster care that broke them up and had discontinuous impact on their education. So there are other models, but you got to have a clean government. You got to have people committed to the mission. There has to be real clarity about what it is we want to accomplish. You've got to have metrics, and you've got to have rigorous examination and zero tolerance, obviously, for people who cheat. So if people are gaming the system, they got to be booted out of affordable housing, because the goal here is to use those taxpayer dollars in a wise fashion. So there are models of success. I humbly submit my community is one of them. But there are also, unfortunately, myriad examples, as the Chairman has pointed out, where we fall far short. And so I think today's hearing is designed to try to better understand what are the elements for success and what are those elements that have led to less than success, and how can we, working together at the federal and local level, overcome those obstacles so that we can have more success stories and fewer failures. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing.
Well, thank you. And I might say, too, that I have, in my locale, just a few miles away, a county housing authority that operates an exemplary way. And we've changed out in my previous district, pre-World War II housing in Daytona Beach, in Palatka and West Augustine. I made it a target to, I mean, I've always said this, the federal government should not be a slumlord, and that we should be responsible. So today, unfortunately, we'll hear some of the examples of problems that need to be addressed, but there are some of these authorities that do incredible work, and I'm glad to hear your story. Let me yield for 5 minutes to the gentlelady from New York. Ms. Maloney, welcome, and you're recognized.
Thank you so much for including me in this hearing. Public housing is critically important in our nation, and Mr. Conley, Ranking Member, and I share your concern over waste, fraud, and abuse that undermines the support for public housing and affordable housing that is so desperately needed in our country. I want to compliment Mr. Conley on your really innovative story on housing in I guess it's Arlington, right? No. Where was it?
Hush your mouth.
Where?
They're all communists over there. No. Just teasing for the record.
Where?
Fairfax County.
Fairfax County, to have raised the money for affordable housing with the penny tax code is a very innovative, great idea. And so I thank you for including me in today's hearing, and I really want to welcome New York City's Housing Authority General Manager, Cecil House, who will be testifying. NYCHA provides vital services to my constituents and so many others throughout New York City. It is the largest public housing authority in North America, and NYCHA houses so many people that if it were a city, it would rank 23rd in population size in the United States. More than 400,000 New Yorkers reside in NYCHA's 334 public housing developments around our 5 boroughs. So it's hugely important to housing needs in New York City. Another 235,000 receive subsidized rental assistance in private homes through the NYCHA-administered Section 8 leased housing program. And NYCHA Public Housing represents 8.2% of the city's rental apartments and is home to over 4 million, or 4.8% of the city's population. More than 76,000, or roughly 20% of NYCHA residents are seniors, and I thank the more than 11,000 NYCHA employees who work to support New York City's housing needs. Public housing provides a real service to our communities, which is why it's so important that they are well run and use taxpayer dollars effectively. It's in huge demand in New York. When I was a city council member, the waiting list was over 900,000 people. I joined many of my New York federal and local colleagues in calling for a top-to-bottom forensic audit of how NYCHA is using its dollars. And I look forward to seeing that report later this year, so we know best how to streamline NYCHA and preserve our public housing lifeline. Affordable housing in New York is very hard to come by. Our new mayor has announced his plan to build and preserve 200,000 safe and affordable housing units in New York City, and I look forward to working with Mayor de Blasio and NYCHA to achieve this goal to see the city's housing needs met. But we all know this requires critical investments. I am deeply committed to maintaining the quality of public housing in New York City and around the country, and I look forward to today's testimony. And the way to best preserve it, in my opinion, is to make sure there's no waste, fraud, and abuse so that the public support for public tax dollars and support is there. I thank all of you that are testifying today, and especially my colleagues. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Maloney, and thank you for participating. I'm going to stall for just a second, waiting for our witness to come back, because I'm going to have to swear you all in. I hadn't put up some pictures of my housing authority in Sanford, and we can. I guess I can't make these pictures part of the record, but there's one little picture there you might see. This is where people should live and have public housing, and you see what we have. Vacant lots where we've torn down the units. Just go. There's two other ones. Well, get settled. This is boarded up public housing, and that's some that we had rehabbed. Now they're being demoed. And one more picture. And again, this is where they demoed some of the units. It's kind of sad. Now we're having a debate as to whether to have the housing authority continue, or I would like to see them consolidate with the other housing authority in town or in our community. The administration cost of two housing authorities closely aligned geographically makes no sense. So and now we've got all of our witnesses back, and let me just mention to the witnesses that this is in fact a investigative hearing. I'll swear you in a minute. There are other members who aren't here today, and members may have 7 days to submit opening statements for the record. And now I will recognize our first panel. The panel is composed of Mr. David Montoya, is Inspector General of the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. Mr. Cecil House is the General Manager of the New York City Housing Authority. And Mr. Kelvin Jeremiah is President and CEO of the Philadelphia Housing Authority. I want to welcome our witnesses, and as I said, this is an investigative hearing, and we do swear on our witnesses, so if you'll please stand, raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give before this subcommittee of Congress is the whole truth and nothing but the truth? All of the witnesses answered in the affirmative. For the record, I welcome each of you. I don't know if you've testified before us before. What we like to do is have you sort of summarize your testimony in 5 minutes so we can have a questioning and exchange of information. If you have additional information, testimony, or data you'd like submitted to the record, just a request, and we will comply. So first, let me welcome Mr. David Montoya, the Inspector General of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. You're recognized. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Mica, Ranking Member Connolly, and members of the subcommittee, I am David Montoya, the Inspector General of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. I thank you for the opportunity to highlight our perspectives on waste, fraud, abuse, and mismanagement in public housing authorities, or PHAs, as they are known, and our work over the years. Public housing was established to provide decent and safe rental housing for eligible low-income families, the elderly, and persons with disability. It is the role of HUD's Office of Public and Indian Housing to not only safeguard this, but to create opportunities for residents' self-sufficiency and economic independence, and to assure fiscal integrity by all program participants. There are approximately 1.1 million households living in public housing units managed by over 3,000 PHAs. Approximately 2,300 PHAs also locally administer HUD's Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program, which is the Department's principal program for assisting eligible families obtain housing in the private market. This program provides rental assistance to approximately 2.2 million families. Oversight of HUD's public housing programs continues to be a priority for my office. Since the beginning of fiscal year 2012, we have issued 75 audits related to PHAs, reporting roughly $225 million in questioned costs and approximately $24 million in funds to be put to better use. Our investigative activity also continues to be significant, as we have completed a total of 216 administrative and civil actions and 121 criminal actions. In order to better synthesize and highlight the continuing problems we have identified in this area, we are assessing our lengthy history of work for continuing patterns of practice that negatively affect PHAs. This effort is intended to focus the Department's attention on problem areas that we and others have reported on over many years, and to set about to develop and recommend an array of strategies for consideration by the Department and Congress on ways to address and correct longstanding problems. We have found that PHAs often operate with little oversight, and too often we see executive directors and the PHA's boards or commissions exercising little or no oversight of their own. Too often these officials have few or no qualifications to effectively discharge their responsibilities. Certification and accreditation of key personnel associated with the running of a PHA are missing links in mitigating opportunities for mismanagement and poor governance. These vulnerabilities are magnified when one considers that HUD relies a great deal on electronic reporting through PHA's self-assessments and through other self-reported information collected in HUD's information systems as its primary form of oversight. Until HUD is able to modernize its outdated systems and more effectively target its resources, it will continue to be constrained in adequate oversight. This is further exacerbated by programs like Moving to Work and policies designed to loosen oversight of funding and reporting, which we believe are counterintuitive to the many problems we and GAO have reported on over the years. It is my contention that cities, counties, and states should do more to share in the burden and responsibility for the management, operation, and oversight of their public housing authority and programs. While HUD is responsible for overseeing PHAs, it has limited resources which are easily overwhelmed by the magnitude of the program and requirements. In order to address some of the recurrent systemic problems, we have issued several fraud prevention materials, including integrity bulletins, and posted them on our website. These are designed to showcase abuses, as well as to educate PHA staff, local and state officials, and the public on better ways to avoid mismanagement and fraud. The Department's role and mission has greatly increased over the last decade, including spearheading redevelopment in post-9/11 Lower Manhattan, the devastated post-Katrina Gulf Coast, the economic crisis caused by the subprime mortgage collapse, and the recent Hurricane Sandy disaster response. Because of the limited capability of the Department to provide direct oversight, it is critically more important than ever that program participants, beneficiaries, and local and state authorities take on more responsibility in proper administration and oversight of PHAs. My office is strongly committed to working with the Department and Congress to ensure that these important programs operate efficiently, effectively, and as intended. This concludes my oral testimony, and I would be pleased to answer your questions.
Well, thank you for your testimony, and we'll go to questions, as I said, after we've heard from the other witnesses. Let me recognize now Cecil House, General Manager of the New York Housing Authority. Welcome, and you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Mica, Ranking Member Connolly, and members of the subcommittee. I'm Cecil House, General Manager of the New York City Housing Authority, or NYCHA as we call it, the largest public housing agency in the United States. NYCHA is committed to fulfilling its mandate under Federal law to provide safe, decent, and affordable housing to over 630,000 low and moderate income Americans. To provide you with a sense of scale, as Congresswoman Maloney indicated, if the population of NYCHA was a city unto itself, it would be the nation's 23rd largest city, comparable in size to the city of Boston. Our public housing program encompasses over 178,000 apartments in over 2,600 buildings located throughout New York City, with more than 31,000 private landlords participating in our Housing Choice Voucher program. The authority also provides housing assistance to an additional 225,000 individuals. I've been at the helm of the authority's day-to-day operations for the past 20 months and can say that our new administration, under the leadership of Mayor Bill de Blasio and our NYCHA Chair and CEO, Shola Olatoye, is determined to ensure that NYCHA is a successful practitioner of good management and a provider of quality services to the working families, elderly and disabled citizens, and veterans who rely on our programs for their housing, assistance in entering the workforce, educational opportunities, and the stability of our communities. We are committed to preserving every unit of public housing in New York City, to strengthening our Housing Choice Voucher program, and to ensuring that NYCHA is a responsible guardian of these public assets, which will play an important role in the Mayor's new housing plan to build or preserve over 200,000 safe and affordable housing units in New York City. We at NYCHA believe that ensuring public dollars are being well spent on providing housing assistance to the most vulnerable in our society is critical. We systematically review our operations to improve the quality of life of NYCHA residents and to increase the efficiency and productivity in the management of our programs. NYCHA is restructuring operations, reducing administrative overhead, modernizing our business systems, and implementing data-driven managerial controls to better monitor the performance of essential functions. We are working hard to implement cost savings in order to return the best value to the taxpayer for every public dollar allocated. At the managerial level, the authority has implemented a hiring freeze and has reduced its total employee headcount by over 16% since 2004. We are relying on constantly updated metrics to derive efficiencies from a wide spectrum of functions, resulting in improved service levels for apartment maintenance and repair rates, heat and hot water complaints, elevator uptime, Section 8 recertification and inspection rates, rent collection and delinquency rates, and apartment prep turnaround times, among other essential markers. Our backlog for open maintenance and repair work tickets in particular has been dramatically reduced, and our public housing assessment system and Section 8 management assessment program scores are trending upward. Procurement is another area in which NYCHA is bringing best practices from the private sector to bear on our operations with a continuing focus on reducing costs. Following a thorough review, NYCHA is streamlining and updating our inventory systems. We've consolidated 14 procurement offices into a single department, resulting in better internal controls, improved reliability, and greater leveraging of our expenditures. No managerial objective is more critical than the fiscal responsibility and transparency the authority owes to the public. NYCHA has implemented a rigorous, structured, and thoughtful finance and budgeting process designed to deliver the greatest value for the limited resources that we have. The authority publishes our annual budget online and meet regularly with residents and stakeholders to discuss the allocation of resources. NYCHA also maintains an audit department providing an independent assessment of the efficiency of the authority's operations, the adequacy of internal controls, the accuracy of financial data, and compliance with applicable laws, regulations, and procedures. Beyond NYCHA's own efforts, the City of New York maintains a robust anti-fraud, waste, theft, and corruption infrastructure in the form of its Department of Investigation. Fundamental to ensuring that the highest standards are abided by NYCHA in the expenditure of public funds is the NYCHA Office of the Inspector General, a 50-member unit within the Department of Investigation, working independently of the Housing Authority's leadership and reporting directly to the Department of Investigation Commissioner. Specific IG teams are dedicated to monitoring the authority's activity in regard to contracting, construction management, labor, and other key areas. The authority faces great challenges in attempting to meet a need for affordable housing in New York City, which far exceeds supply, and is seeking to maintain a large portfolio of aging residential buildings in an era when Federal commitment to public housing has dramatically receded, and the authority burden has grown.
Mr. Chairman, excuse me one second. We are over time, and I'm going to ask the gentleman, with the Chairman's permission, to summarize, because we have votes, and
Yes,
we
sir.
probably won't be coming back after the votes because there are going to be like 8 votes in a row. So we want to have the chance to dialogue with you if the Chairman.
If you could begin to conclude.
Sure. My last statement was I would be pleased to respond to such questions as you may have.
All right.
Well, thank you, and we'll go now to Mr. Kelvin Jeremiah, and he's President and CEO of the Philadelphia Housing Authority. Welcome, and you're recognized.
Good morning, Chairman Micah, Ranking Member Connolly, distinguished members of the subcommittee. I am Kelvin Jeremiah, the President and CEO of the Philadelphia Housing Authority. PHA was established in 1937 as a municipal corporation organized under the statutes of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to provide safe and decent housing to low and moderate income individuals in the city of Philadelphia. PHA is primarily funded and is accountable to the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, its Board of Commissioners, the Mayor, the City Council, and the citizens of the City of Philadelphia. As such, PHA employees, residents, and contractors hold a significant position of public trust. The public, therefore, has a right to expect PHA's employees, contractors, and those doing business with PHA to perform their responsibilities honestly and with integrity. Thank you for the opportunity to highlight my perspective on waste, fraud, and abuse, and mismanagement of housing authority programs and appropriations. PHA is the fourth largest housing authority in the United States and the largest landlord in Pennsylvania. PHA is also one of a select group of housing authorities across the country that has attained move-into-work status. This designation allows PHA to spend its $375 million annual budget in a more flexible manner, strategically allocating resources on housing and self-sufficiency programs to residents that best fits the local environment. Financial support for PHA's operations and capital needs comes primarily from rent payments and subsidies provided by HUD. Most specifically, approximately 93% of PHA's revenues comes from the federal government in the form of subsidies for affordable housing. Only 6% of our revenue comes from tenant rents, and the remaining balance comes from grants from the city, the Commonwealth, and other sources. Approximately 75%, or three-quarters, of PHA's budget is dedicated to its core mission, funding the actual provision, protection, creation, and maintenance of housing for low-income individuals. With a staff of 1,300 full-time employees, PHA provides housing assistance to nearly 80,000 people in its two main housing programs, the Public Housing Program and the Housing Choice Voucher Program. In the public housing program, low-income persons pay a set percentage below 30% of their income to PHA to rent PHA-owned units. As of the close of fiscal year 2014, PHA served over 13,000 households while maintaining a 93% occupancy rate. PHA has a public housing waitlist of nearly 28,000 households. On average, PHA's public housing families have an average household income of $10,645 and pay $267 in monthly rent. In the HCV program, formerly known as Section 8, low-income persons receive a voucher to subsidize their rent to private landlords in units of their own choosing. There are also variations to the program, such as the VASH program, which exclusively serves homeless veterans referred to the Housing Authority by local Veterans Administration. PHA is very proud of its efforts in this area and has set a model of efficiency, meeting housing needs of this population, managing 460 VASH vouchers, and is one of 25 cities nationally participating in a HUD, VA, and U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness collaborative effort to end chronic homelessness among veterans by 2015. As of the close of fiscal year 2014, PHA managed 19,073 vouchers with a utilization rate of 84%. PHA's HCV waitlist is 34,000 household long. On average, PHA's families have an average household income of $10,061 and pay a monthly rent of $288. It is widely known, Mr. Chairman, that wasteful spending is present throughout government institutions, including the one that I am privileged to head. Mr. Chairman, it is my understanding that you and the members of this subcommittee have raised valid questions and concerns regarding fraud, waste, and corruption in public housing and have been strong advocates for rigorous oversight that safeguard public resources from waste and mismanagement. I share your concerns and have spent my professional career bringing about positive changes in the integrity, efficiency, and effectiveness of public housing programs. My experience over the past decade is one that I am very proud of, Mr. Chairman, and more importantly, has been focused on building trust and restoring public confidence in public housing. I have seen firsthand the deleterious impact of corruption, fraud, and waste, which undermines the scarce resources from reaching the individuals who need them most. It limits the number of eligible tenants, ability to access limited funding, and increases the cost of projects, which in turn increases the cost to the agency. It is for those reasons that my tenure at PHA has been focused on accountability, transparency, and making data-driven decisions. I joined PHA in 2011 as the Director of the Office of Audit and Compliance, a robust watchdog agents department that has been focused on eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse. Mr. Chairman, over the last 2 years, PHA, with the Office of Audit and Compliance, have established strong collaborative partnerships with several federal, state, and local enforcement agencies in an effort to protect the integrity of PHA and to further hold individuals who commit fraud accountable. We've conducted over 700 investigations, substantiated 299 cases, and referred many, but 32, for criminal prosecution, working with our OIG partners and other city and state local officials. Mr. Chairman, it is the consistent demand for affordable housing, as evidenced by our wait list of over 62,000 applicants, many of which wait on average 10 years to be housed, reaffirms the critical importance of our mission. This demand, coupled with the shrinking federal resources, makes it critical that public administrators take an active role in preventing, deterring corruption, fraud, and waste, in addition to taking a more innovative approach to business improvement.
Begin to conclude, Mr.
Yes, sir. Fostering change that improves management operations, accountability, and transparency will ultimately improve the lives of the people who benefit from the programs we administer. I appreciate the opportunity to testify before this subcommittee today and would be happy to answer your questions.
Well, thank you, and we'll get right to questions. First of all, Mr. Montoya, appreciate your work. How many people do you have working under your operation, your Inspector General operation for HUD?
Currently, our staffing is about 615, and that's the entire office.
Is that adequate?
Well, we'd be remiss if I said it's never going to be adequate. We're about 100 people down, though, sir, over the last 2.5 years with budget cuts.
With budget?
Yes,
budget cut. Okay. One of the things that concerns me, well, first, I think we need to make certain you have the resources to do the job to conduct the oversight. HUD gave us this little, I guess HUD sort of by the numbers. This isn't my publication. It says public housing by the numbers under the HUD publication. Where the money goes, 29% for administration. That, to me, seems very, very high. 33% for maintenance. You've got a lot of old structures. I can see that. 29. I mean, I've been in the rental business. I never pay more than 10% to manage anything. Have you looked at these figures for administration within HUD?
With the
and the money going out, I guess this is both operation of HUD and then money for public housing authorities. Would you know if that's correct?
I don't know. Is that 33% within HUD that goes to administration?
Well, no, it says it's public housing.
The 33%
numbers, and 33%, that's where the money goes overall that HUD is spending, I would believe, and 29% for administration. Well, most of HUD in Washington is administration, which is probably very high. How many people in HUD in Washington?
I couldn't tell you in Washington. There are 8,000 total, but quite
8,000 total?
Quite a few nationwide, quite a few, though, in D.C. I don't know what the exact number is.
But again, it's just a high number. We could turn this over to the private sector. I'm sure management companies would chomp at the bit to get if it's 29% of the billions of dollars that are going out, that's a lot of money for administration.
Well, sir, what I would add is that, yes, the administration portion of public housing authorities is quite high, quite frankly.
What the notes say.
And the notes. I was getting to my point. The administration of public housing authorities is quite high. They recently established this cost office center, if you will, to manage the overall administration of these housing authorities. What they're allowed to do is to take a percentage of certain projects, right? So they're taking federal money, taking a certain percentage of that on certain projects as a fee, administrative fee, to cover their overhead, if you will. HUD, gave them a blanket pass on about 10% on their capital funds. So they can take 10% of their capital funds and make it administrative fees. Once these fees are earned, per se, they become non-federalized. We think that defederalizing these administrative funds, if you will, doesn't appear to be reasonable, especially in light of the fact that they're fully supported by grants and subsidies in direct rent to begin with. When these funds become defederalized, they can virtually use these funds for anything they want. That goes to then the issue of high salaries. They could actually use these then defederalized funds to pay some of these high salaries we've seen, right? Because it doesn't fall into the category of reporting what federal money you've spent on a salary.
Well, there are ways to reduce this. I mean, one, if I was looking at this from a business standpoint, first I'd pass a law that did away with the administrative staff. We contract this out with a limit in the cost of administration. There are hundreds of thousands of management real estate folks that could properly manage this. And we haven't talked about salaries of some of these. I know there are some caps put on the executive positions within the housing authorities. Isn't there a federal cap of, is it currently $155,000?
It's a little over with the increase in salary that the administration approved, but it's about $155,000. What I would say to you—
How much, Mr. House, what's your salary?
My salary is $195,000.
Mr. Jeremiah, what's your salary?
My salary is $225,000.
Sounds like you're getting screwed, House. But that isn't the question at hand. The question at hand is how do they get to that number, and we have a cap. Aren't they subject to that cap?
Well, I'll tell you, they both make more than I do, Mr. Chairman. Having said that, what I would say is that, yeah, there's a way around that cap.
They both make more than we do, too, Mr. Lincoln.
I'm sure.
Well, again, I mean, they're not, they don't have Mickey Mouse operations. Those are huge operations, and maybe to find the right talent, you've got to pay more. I've never been one to, in fact, I've advocated for federal government to pay to get the best expertise we can to operate systems and manage operations and attract them and reward people who do a good job. But we have a law. How do they get around that?
Well, the law says that they have that only $155,000 of federal funds
money. Okay, so
can be paid. And of course, we have an issue that we'll certainly be talking to the Department and to Congress about with regards to the definition of salary. Salary doesn't include such things as bonuses, PHA vehicles, benefits like retirement, life and medical insurance. These things aren't covered.
You two are relatively new in your positions. Is that correct, Mr. House? How long?
Yes, 22 months and 2 days.
So, well, you've been eligible for a bonus. Do you get a bonus on top of that?
Absolutely not.
And you need to talk to some folks there. And you, Mr. Jeremiah, of course, it depends on your performance. That's should be the criteria. Mr. Jeremiah?
I'm coming up in 2 years.
Have you gotten a bonus?
Yes, I have.
How much is that?
$10,000.
Well, okay. Not a king's ransom, but significant. But again, I'm just, not to pick on you two, and we appreciate your coming to testify because you have two of the largest housing authorities in the country. Every time I try to get some decision made, Mr. Montoya, on moving forward with some alternatives, for example, I don't want to replace a ghetto with a ghetto. All I get are that HUD will not permit this or HUD will not permit that. Have you got any recommendations on how, for example, replacement of some of these units? The worst place that you would want to put an investment for real estate would be back into some public housing authority. And then, unfortunately, too, our public housing authorities, where the public housing is, if you talk to the sheriffs, the police chiefs, and other law enforcement people, are sort of the center of all kinds of difficult community crime issues. Do we have enough alternatives? And I don't like just replacing units with units. Do we have enough alternatives to allow variations? For example, bringing in the private sector to produce housing, come in with projects, replacement projects. I've done the Hope 6 or whatever we had projects and other replacements, but it's public housing replacement projects for public housing. Have you looked at this at all, Mr. Montoya?
No, sir, we have not. Now, while I couldn't speak to that, I think from what we've seen, and certainly not speaking with regards to the two gentlemen beside me because they seem to have a very good background and experience, but what we consistently see in these PHAs is executive directors and boards of commissions who really don't have the background and experience to run these PHAs, and some of them are running multi-hundred-million-dollar programs. We feel that accreditation, certification, something on that order yeah, exactly, of these executive directors and these boards would help.
Well, the one we got from HUD, and I did everything I could after we had that taken over by HUD. And then actually another congressman called me and said, the guy they're sending over there is horrible. I could not get them to not employ him. So these are people that HUD is sometimes recommending. I mean, it's so offensive, and within 7, 8 years he ran it into the ground, ran off with money. The other thing, too, is you do criminal referrals?
Yes, sir, we do.
Okay. Well, for example, I've been trying to find out where the hell a criminal referral is on this guy. If I went in with a gun and a mask and robbed people of a fraction of this money, I would be in the slammer. I've written you all. I want a response. If you did a criminal, is it public knowledge when you do a criminal referral, or do you have to keep it confidential?
Well, generally we don't speak to it. I can tell you.
No, but if a member of Congress asks you, I've got a specific case.
Yes, sir.
You call the Department of Justice, and they won't say anything, and I can see that because of the proceedings they're involved in. But on my case, I want to know if a criminal referral. Do you know anything about the?
What I would say in your case, sir, is that yes, we had criminal referrals made to the Department of Justice. They were declined on the basis.
They were declined by the Department of Justice?
Yes, sir, they were.
Well, oh man, that one really. See, I did not know that, but that just burns me. That's unbelievable. So. We will. I want staff to look at that if we need to hold them in. I'd like to see what the basis is. What they have to do. Do they have to use a gun or a knife? And I have the previous executive director who stole fortune, did all kinds of abusive things, got probation, and. People who do violate federal law can still be subject to prosecution under state law. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
In these cases?
Yes, sir.
So, okay, I may pursue that, too. We've got case after case of problems, and I've got, again, I want to give credit because you have good operations. Mr. Connolly cited one, I cited. I've got 5 or 6 great operations. But there's some consistent poor performers. Why has the East St. Louis Housing Authority been under government receivership for almost 30 years? Any idea what's going on there?
Well, the last we had done with regards to that was, I think, HUD's just failure to properly plan for the management of that program.
Now, in the past, I wrote a letter with one specific housing authority that I thought should be taken over. Can a member of Congress request that of any agents, of any of these operations?
I wouldn't see why not, sir.
So if I do my own review, I might be giving you a list, so you may have a lot to do. It's amazing, again. So you can see poor performance once, twice. Of course, some of them, like the Sanford, has gone on for 2 decades, and here we have St. Louis for 30 years.
Right. What I would say with regards to your situation, sir, is I couldn't agree with you more that this gentleman should never have been allowed in your housing authority. He had been previously fired from one
Yes.
and asked to resign or face firing from 2 others. But we consistently see this. We consistently see bad actors who either were under investigation or had questionable activity move from PHA to PHA, and it just exacerbates these problems we continue to see. So when you say you see a lot of the same actors, we see a lot of the same
Well, your
executives.
suggestion today on a certification or some type of validation, staff, let's see if we can't come up with something. Maybe you join me, Mr. Conley. We need to put some measures in place to bring some of this to a halt. Well, I don't want to take all the time. I try to, but I can't, and I must yield now to our ranking member, Mr. Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd be glad to join with you because I mean, I think you put your finger on something. I guess I'm, well, dismayed is the most mild word I could describe at the lack of professional criteria for running huge enterprises in some cases. And the fact that you've got somebody who's a repeated bad actor who somehow nonetheless gets hired. I mean, I've hired a lot of executives in local government. You have to check references. You have to Google them. You have to look up their record. You have to check around their reputation in the localities in which they worked. And that's just part of your due diligence. And it is shocking to me. Let me ask you, Mr. Montoya, when it comes to let's refer to someone as a bad actor or someone with a very spotty record that is clear, not by innuendo, the record's clear. Does HUD have the ability to tell a PHA, we won't reimburse you for any part of that salary if you hire that person?
HUD has quite a lot of latitude with regards to these, sir. I don't know about that specifically, but I would imagine with the latitude they have in providing funding, they could do that. I don't know. What I would like to say is I would like to say thank you to Congress. It wasn't up until this recent appropriations that Congress mandated HUD to work with us, my office, right, to incorporate some training on fraud awareness and the problems that we have been consistently seeing. And it's only been recently, within the last month, that we have been contacted by the Assistant Secretary for PIH and some of the associations for these housing authorities in order to do that. And I don't believe it would have happened without Congress's support, and I appreciate that. And we hope to take that further, and time will tell.
Well, it just seems to me, Mr. Chairman, that in addition to the whole certification thing, which I think is long overdue, there ought to be a training and certification program for managers and boards that oversee these enterprises. And that's not a new concept. It's done in many other fields, and it's long overdue here. But it seems to me we also ought to explore what authorities HUD has and can and should be using, since it pays up to $150,000 per your previous question. I think it's $150,000 you said? Or
well,
$155,000?
$155,000. Well, that's what we will pay in federal funds.
I know, but if you get a bad actor with a bad history, presumably you have the power to say to a local PHA, you can hire that person. We're not going to reimburse you.
I would suspect so.
It's on your watch, and because they're on our list and they've got three strikes, they're out. Okay. How long? When was HUD founded, Mr. Montoya?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, sir.
Roughly
when it was founded.
1965.
Yes, sir.
So it's coming up on its 50th anniversary. Now, I'm reading your testimony, and you said in the testimony that the Department ought to develop a physical inspection system for the HCV program. Remind us, the HCV program is the
Housing Choice Voucher Program?
Right. How long has the HCV program been in existence?
You mean the program, or you mean the housing quality standards, sir, or the HCV?
I'm reading your testimony. You refer to the HCV program. So what do you mean by the HCV program, and how old is it?
The Housing Choice Voucher Program is really the Section 8 housing
Right.
program, and it's been around probably as long as HUD is.
And we're just now talking about a physical inspection program at HUD?
Well, we're talking about a physical inspection program with regards to the housing quality standards. So if you were paying
Right.
housing choice vouchers for units that should be inspected for housing quality, it's been about 6 years that we recommended to HUD that they institute a better mechanism to do these inspections, and they've yet to complete that.
When did we adopt common standards at HUD for Section 8? Here are the standards you really ought to be meeting.
Right. With regard to Section 8, it's been around, I believe, as long as the program with regards to their inspections of these things.
No.
Not quite sure.
Standards first. The standards are not new is my point.
Correct. That's correct.
So we're just now talking about, maybe we should inspect some of them. After 50 years? And then when HUD has inspected, I'm reading again from your testimony, of the 119 units inspected, 99 didn't meet the standards.
That's correct. That was in
And
our
that's just a sample. So, I don't know, 99 out of 119 sounds close to 90%.
Yeah, out of about 12,000, I think, that the universe made up.
And 24 of the 99 that didn't meet standards were in material noncompliance.
And those had been long-standing issues that should have been corrected some time before that.
I just find that astounding. We've been in existence for 50 years. Our mission's not new. The apparatus is not new. The bureaucracy is not new. This isn't rocket science. It's housing.
Couldn't agree with you more.
Standards of quality for our clients who live in this housing. Again, not, hopefully we're not, in the tenements of the Bowery in 1900. I mean, we have higher standards in 2014. And HUD isn't even inspecting them. We're still talking about maybe we got to physically inspect. Now, does HUD delegate that responsibility to local PHAs like Mr. House and Mr. Jeremiah?
Yes, sir. In the case of NYCHA, yes, it's delegated to that.
And how good of a job do they do?
Well, part of what our report suggested was that there's no consistency in how those inspections are conducted.
That tells me HUD doesn't manage it.
Yeah, the other concern that we saw in the report was that a requirement, I think it's a performance issue, requirement that 25 be inspected a day. So we think that this high level of measure is really driving bad behavior. Our inspectors could at best get to 5 or 6 a day, and that was doing a full inspection to include the driving between the boroughs. So I think a performance measure of 25 is driving some bad behavior there.
Good point. Yeah, and it's a double standard. We don't hold ourselves to that, but we ask them to do it.
Correct.
And you're absolutely right. That's bound to get someone to say, check.
That's exactly what we
Because
see happening.
I don't want to look bad. I got to 18, but I couldn't get to 25, so the other 8, they're probably roughly okay. And maybe they're not. So, yeah, we got to look at that. Mr. Jeremiah, if I heard your testimony, by the way, Mr. Montoya, I just think there are some real kind of fairly obvious low-hanging fruit management improvements HUD could make on itself that would have a positive impact on local housing authorities. And after 50 years, it is inexplicable why they haven't been adopted. Just to me, inexplicable. I've run a large government, and I would never tolerate what you just described. And that's the tip of the iceberg. There are all kinds of other aspects we could look at. Yes, and I just think HUD's going to have to clean up its act. If we're going to have a positive impact on local PHAs and hold them to standards that, we believe in. At any rate, Mr. Jeremiah, you talked about, I think, 700-plus investigations for malfeasance, corruption, mismanagement, and the like. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you said 299 were referred for criminal prosecution?
299 cases were substantiated. 32 were referred for criminal prosecution.
By the way, why only 32? I mean, if you had 299 with substantial defects.
Or substantiated. A lot of these cases, quite frankly, are cases that are under $50,000, and there is a reluctance on the part of prosecutors to prosecute those cases. So we often have to enter into repayment agreements with them.
And how often does that happen?
Quite often.
So that would be buried in the 299?
That would be buried in the 299.
Do you have any idea how many of the 299 involved settlements, payback settlements?
I don't have that specific number with me, Mr. Scott.
So 32 were referred for prosecution or for further action by the prosecutor?
Yes, for prosecution.
And how many of the 32 were in fact prosecuted?
So of the 32 cases that were referred, we've had 10 arrests thus far, and there are 5 that are pending. The rest has not yet been acted upon.
Any trials?
Generally, no. They're usually pleas.
You know, the chairman made reference to a housing authority in his district where we've had consecutive executive directors who apparently absconded with money. You would think, having been burned once, you'd be real careful about who you hired to replace that person. But, and I would just say, I guess what troubles me about these statistics is that when you know, I understand that we're going to always narrow down, and we certainly want to be fair to everybody, but if you want to deter theft and corruption, one good way to do it is to prosecute and incarcerate.
I agree with you entirely.
In fact, I would argue that white-collar crime is precisely the crime you want to have jail time, because them's the folks that really get the message. I don't want to do that, and they're often the ones exempted, unfortunately. And so, listen, people who may be tempted or yield to temptation are going to do a calculus. What's my chance of A, getting caught, B, anything happening even if I am, and C, ever going to trial or even plea bargaining, with some kind of serious consequence? And obviously the odds are pretty good if my intent is not a good one. And I think we have to ramp up, and the chairman suggested this, more referrals, both at the local level and at the federal level, and get tougher about it, and get the Justice Department and our local prosecutors to get tougher about it. I understand the standard of 50,000, but I'm not sure that's a good message either.
Right.
It's not okay to be pilfering even sort of, in modest amounts relative to grand larceny, and that can create a culture that undermines the mission and the faith of the public in the mission of the agency. It's all corrupt. They're all on the take, and nobody does anything about it. You don't want that reputation. You don't want that perception. And I just think this is a very serious part of what we're doing to sort of get ourselves, where we've had problems, back on track in trying to win back the confidence of the public in our mission, what we do.
Well, Mr. Connolly, there is a perception that the crimes that are committed as it relates to fraud and corruption are sometimes victimless crime. I attend every sentencing in a case that involves the PHA, and I have the opportunity to deliver a victim impact statement, which are often taken into account by the judge. There are those occasions when the judge does not take that into account, and I can tell you that we've had some incredible successes working with our local and federal partners to hold people accountable. But there has been a number of cases where folks got off on probation, where they only got 6 months. For example, one case involving the theft of construction materials, well over $400,000 in construction materials. One of the defendants got 6 months in jail. There are kickback cases where we saw a very good result where that defendant got 50 months in jail. But so it does run the gamut. I believe that it's important in terms of deterring fraud and corruption that we hold those folks accountable. But I will add that even when the system does not, PHA has taken a very aggressive stance in holding them accountable. And the way we do that is by forfeiting their pensions.
Good. I just say to you, as somebody, again, who spent 14 years in local government, the key to success is you've got the public with you. They have confidence in the organization, in the machinery, in the people, in the leadership. If they don't, your mission is in trouble. And the notion of victimless crime, okay, fair enough. It's not somebody who's been violent and who's hurt somebody else physically. But if you are responsible for eroding confidence in such an important subject area, affordable housing, so the public no longer has any confidence at all in what you're doing, so resources decline, fewer families are assisted, they're victims through no fault of their own because of some venality or mendacity by an employee or a contractor or whoever it may be. And that needs to be taken into account because the erosion of confidence is not a trivial matter. Look at Mr. House in New York. Now, you came from the Bloomberg administration, but you're now in the de Blasio administration. Mayor de Blasio has set a breathtaking, to me, goal of 200,000 affordable housing units in New York City. That's astounding. I mean, my jurisdiction is about 1/8 the size, and we couldn't believe we got 2,400 units in 4 years. So multiplied by 8, maybe you could do 17,000. But 200,000 is going to be an extraordinary feat if it can be accomplished. But if the public has no confidence in you to begin with, you're never gonna reach it. You're not even gonna get a fraction of it. And so it's critical that if we're going to all get behind that goal in New York, we got to have confidence in you, Mr. House, and in the people who run that organization. They can get it done. And that's what's so insidious about corruption, even petty corruption. I just think we have to weed it out, and we need HUD, to really double down on it because it's insidious. Mr. House, I want to give you an opportunity to respond, and then I'm done, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your indulgence.
Well, I think the Mayor's housing plan is, as he's recognized, a very ambitious goal, but it is a critical and necessary need in New York City. The housing prices, housing costs have gone up significantly, and there is a need to have this additional affordable housing across our city. If you look at the individuals that live in public housing, a good portion of them work with our Department of Education, with our health and hospital industries, and those are critical resources, human resources, to make our city work as we move forward. So we need to provide the housing similar to what you've done in Fairfax County, and we need to do that in New York City. And it's just a matter of scale. New York City is so much larger, and the need is, as a result, so much greater.
Thank you, Mr. Conley. I didn't put this up before, but I just want to show you, Mr. Montoya. I got this, and here's the other one. Okay. This is part of my file on the now. Sanford Housing Authority is not in my district. Has never been in my district. It's adjacent to my district. This is part of my file on this little housing authority that's gone wild and the problems that we've had. Just one small one. That brings to mind the expenditure that was cited by the Inspector General on legal costs for the Philadelphia Housing Authority. 30 million over 10 years, over 3 years is 10 million a year. Was some of this money spent going after people, and if so, how much? Was it that I read there were 15 law firms that were employed? How do you incur that kind of a legal bill?
Let me first say that that was before Kelvin Jeremiah came to town. For the record,
what's your current? Well, you've been there.
So since then, so the report is about 3 years old. Since then, we have cut our legal expenditures significantly. Last year alone, it was about $900,000, down from that 10+ million
a year.
A year. I couldn't begin to justify
what
why
was done in the past.
Not just what was done in the past, but why there would be such an incredible need for what I would consider, and I do share the IG's comments, that it's excessive.
And you investigated that, but you couldn't get documentation on what justified that $10 million a year average?
We looked at a portion of it, sir. And out of the $30 million, we looked at a representative sample of that, a little over $4.5 million. And you're correct. Of the amount we looked at, there was no real justification for the expenditure. So
the problem, there's $30 million over 3 years. He's going to $900,000, and they were spending $10 million for 15 firms. So it's money just gone.
Right. So we basically extrapolated that the entire $30 million would be in question. And then out of all of that, $1.1 million specifically spent to obstruct our audits. And I mean, they did things like, and again, this is not under the purview of Mr. Jeremiah, but things like having 3 attorneys with each of our folks when we did interviews. They had to look at every record before they turned it over to us. These are things that, as the IG, we have a right and responsibility to oversee.
Can I just interject here, Mr. Chairman, on that? Just, aren't there laws against deliberate?
Were they using federal money?
Yes, sir. It was federal money.
So they were using federal money.
Well, but don't you have some redress, both criminal and civil?
Sure, and we end up getting what we needed. But
no, that's not my question. When someone, listen, if someone's investigated and you even lie to the FBI, it's a crime. To actually spend money for legal resources deliberately to obstruct an IG report involving federal money, and oh, by the way, to make insult to injury using federal money to obstruct federal money, that's got to be a crime and prosecutable. What happened?
Well, what I would say to that is we're not done.
All right.
If I could just leave it with that, we're not done.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
No, and I just discussed with staff, too, making certain that you have the resources to pursue some of this. I mean, to me, some of what I've read, what I've heard is just astounding. And again, when you come to obstruction of your work and using taxpayer monies to obstruct it, we're reaching about the limit. Somehow we have to drill down on this and go after these folks. Period. So we will we'll see what we can do to make the resources.
We appreciate your support.
I had a question about we do have, unfortunately, like in my community, Central Florida, about 25% of the homeless are veterans. And you touted, Mr. House, was it you that you had 460 homeless veterans under this?
That was me.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Jeremiah. Okay, I've got you on the wrong place. So how many units do you have total?
For
your whole housing authority?
So we have approximately 13,000.
13,460.
Public housing.
Doesn't sound like a big number.
Yeah, it does not.
Was that a limit on the program, or is that a limit on your effort, or what?
Well, there has been some structural issues with our housing authority making units available.
Do veterans get a preference for housing when they're homeless?
They do.
They do. Okay, and so they would naturally come to the top of the list. And you had a waiting list?
Yes, we do. The waiting list generally wouldn't apply to homeless vets. As I said, that there is a,
But again, if I have a waiting list, how big is your waiting list?
it's about 60,000.
60,000. So, and a good number of those would be veterans, and they don't get a preference in being first
No,
up.
a good number of those will not be veterans.
No, but I'm saying the ones that are identified, they apply and they list that we're a veteran. Do they do that?
They do, but they would be redirected into the VASH program.
I know, but 460 is,
It's a
and you
small.
have 13,000 units.
We do.
Yeah, and you got 60,000, so I'm saying it would be my preference to give those that serve the country an opportunity to have the first shot at whatever is available. Is
And
that
they
the
do.
way you're doing it?
Yes, they do. They do have, once they've indicated that they're a veteran, they would be removed from the 60,000 plus.
And
wait
given
list.
first preference.
And they would be
to-
given first preference.
Now, is this limited, what is it, VASH? What's the acronym for the
The
program?
Veterans Administration,
VASH?
yeah,
Okay. So,
Board of Housing.
and are you only assisting those to the limits of that program funding availability? Or
That's
you-
cor-
Or are
that's
you
correct.
going beyond that and prioritizing those folks so that they get first up on your dollar?
So we're doing both.
Okay, that was my question. Did you have a?
Mr. Chairman, just to be fair, Mr. Chairman, if you would, just real quickly, I want to get some stuff on the record.
Oh, go right ahead.
Because if one only heard our previous exchange, one might think we're still in the middle of this. And so I want to be fair. Obviously, the events we were describing in terms of the obstruction of the IG's investigation was not on your watch,
Right.
Mr. Jeremiah. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct.
Is it all? Yeah.
I would also remind the members that prior to coming to PHA, the Philadelphia Housing Authority, I was an IG, so I understand all
Okay.
too well.
So
all too well.
you're a recovering IG.
We could make that
Yeah, yeah.
a
I
prerequisite.
don't know if I'm recovered. I think I'm recovering.
Okay. It's also important, I think, to get in the record, correct me if I'm wrong, but your predecessor was debarred in part because of his attempts to obstruct the IG report. Is that correct?
That is not quite correct. The debarment related to the failure to file certain lobbying disclosures.
I see.
Probably you can comment on that.
Oh, that's correct. We had also found that they had been using federal money to lobby.
Okay.
So that
which
would
is
be the
illegal,
bar
right?
for it, yes.
Right. In March of 2011, the entire board of the Philadelphia Housing Authority resigned.
That is correct.
And so you have a new board?
We do.
You went into receivership at that time under HUD control. Are you still under receivership?
No, we are 1 year out of receivership.
Okay. So, and then have you closed all of the recommendations made by the HUD IG?
We have, including a reimbursement to the program of about $8.2 million for the legal services that we collectively determined were not necessary or appropriate.
Okay. I just think, thank you, I want to be fair and not leave it hanging that somehow
I
Philadelphia,
appreciate that.
because that's not the case. There's
No,
a
wait.
new guy in town, there's a new board, there's a new mantle, and hopefully we can try to make sure we learn from the terrible mistakes of the past. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think those are very good points, and we appreciate the cooperation of both of you. Both of you are fairly new. I go back, Mr. House, after you learn how much this guy's making next year and how many more units you have. You'd have a little talk up there. You do have a lot of important responsibilities, and but this is a very important subject. I don't know of too many hearings that have gone into depth there, at least from our investigative standpoint. We would like to follow up because you do have a lot of people who need housing assistance and affordable housing, and then making certain we have the alternatives. Got to take a real look at this administrative cost overall and see what we can do to bring that down. I don't mind paying to help people who need housing help, but 29% premium on administration seems over the top. We'll look at that further. Well, I want to thank again the New York and Philadelphia directors for being here. salute you, Mr. Montoya, on your work and the information you brought to the committee and Congress today. We're going to leave the record open for a period of 7 days without objection. We may have additional questions that we didn't have time to get into. Votes have been called. But we thank you so much for being with us and participating in this enlightening hearing. Thank Mr. Connolly, in particular. Ms. Maloney is gone. And we will continue to get the facts and hopefully improve on the expenditure of public funds in such an important area. There being no further business before the subcommittee, this hearing is adjourned.